I want to thank you all for joining us for another Oxford Impact webinar. Today's session is How Do You Know? Understanding how benchmarking is helping business do good, avoid harm, and achieve ESG and SDGs. And today we're going to go through the alphabet soup of ESG and SDGs and what doing good actually means in the context of benchmarking. Next slide. As always, we want to bring you back to Oxford and give you a sense of how beautiful it is. Every time we do one of these webinars, I remember, again, how much I love being in Oxford. So we've got the spires. It's a remarkable place. Imagine that there's no rain. And again, I think that our goals for these sessions, for the Impact Series, is really to understand how you use capital to tackle the world's most complex problems, to share some groundbreaking ideas, and to help our alums, our members of our network, build and strengthen their working relationship. Next slide. This is Said Business School. We're young, entrepreneurial, a world-class institution. Again, our focus is how do we train leaders to tackle the world's most complex issues? We offer 3 programs. One is Impact Investing, and this is what we're going into our 9th year. Social Finance is our 3rd year, and Impact Measures our 2nd year. These are all programs that are connected, interrelated, and really designed and asked for by our students, by our alums, as a way for us to build and strengthen a global community in social finance and impact investing. When we think about the social finance course in particular, which is coming up in November, and we've invited all of our students who are enrolled in our programs and alums in our network to join this. But for social finance, we work across the financial ecosystem, from traditional finance to traditional business, with below market or zero rate return, financial return in traditional philanthropy, to a below market rate return and market rate return. So it's, again, how we use that spectrum of capital to blend deals involving public sector, private sector, philanthropic resources to yield scalable social finance, social change, and goals. And in our case for social finance, it's around the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. This week in New York, as we've all witnessed, last week was the beginning of the climate strike, and we're faced with the world's most complex issues. We call them wicked problems, and that's a framework that we use in class, is how do you address as a leader the most complex issues in the world. And this week, the UN is grappling with climate change through the Climate Action Summit, international universal health care, finance for development, and a variety of other issues, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we're going to be talking about that in the context of benchmarking and how corporations like Novo Nordisk are actually beginning to address those issues. So unraveling this mess is what our programs are intended to do, and how leaders in the field can actually begin to use strategies that allow them to be more successful. Next slide, please. Again, we're looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The social finance program this year deals specifically with 1, no poverty, hunger, healthcare, education, gender equality. We talk about decent work and economic growth, climate change from the Arctic to the Amazon to Africa, as well as peace and justice, and partnerships. How do you develop and maintain and create partnerships that last and that take advantage of private sector finance that's available to fill the gaps that exist in achieving the SDGs. Next slide, please. This is, again, is our map of our students, where our students are from. And as you can see, it's a diverse global network. And I'm pleased to see that many of our students, former students and alums have signed up for this program. Walter, Frank, Vaughn, it's good to see you back. Next slide, please. Now, today is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk with Martin Rich, who's the co-founder and executive director of Future Fit Foundation, and Cora Olsen, who is the global lead integrating reporting at Novo Nordisk, to talk about a Future Fit Foundation's benchmarking strategy for ESG and SDG, and how that relates to how they're integrating that into the area of impact. How do you know you're making a difference? And how do you address the issue, some really gnarly issues of greenwashing that we know exists? How do we address those issues to make sure that benchmarking becomes meaningful and not a titular process, but actually something that is useful, measurable, and actually changes the culture of an organization? I want to start the presentation by asking this question to both Martin and Cora. If you were at the UN today, what advice would you give? And then Cora, you and Martin can move into your presentations, and we'll follow up with the robust questions that we get during our pre-program. And then if there's additional questions that you have during this session, please submit them, and we'll try to get to them as many as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to ask, what would you say to colleagues at the UN today?
Shall I go first?
Yes.
Be my guest. Be my guest.
Yes. I will start us off then. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. So in terms of the UN, that process, of course, multiple things that I could say, but I think it wouldn't be advice. It would more be a ventilation of frustration in terms of the SDGs, which are monumental and hugely important. But I am just completely going to be honest and say I'm just fed up with the corporate cherry picking of issues and targets without really fundamentally changing the nature of business. So I think it wouldn't be so much as that advice as it would be a very, being very frustrated and trying to make that point come across, because I think that many corporates are very, very good at positioning themselves as doing something to move this agenda, but it's at the end of the day not changing anything that they already are doing. So it doesn't change the business model. It doesn't make the world a better place. So that would just be my 2 cents or 5 cents or $10, however you want to say that, and hand it over to Martin. We need to get real.
Perfect. Thank you.
I would completely agree with that, Cora. Actually, I think if I were there, I'd actually be echoing. I think it was the director of the WMO who was saying, come with concrete actions. Don't just come with rhetoric. I think it would be about setting meaningful goals and targets around what you're trying to actually achieve. What are you going to do? We don't need more grandstanding. We don't need more, pretty speeches. What we need is actual action. And that's what I would be requesting that people actually did. Does that sort of answer the question as a starter?
It answers the question, and I think Martin, now lead us into action.
Perfect. So hopefully, can you all see my screen there? I'm going to take that as a yes. I'll find the button that moves me forward, which will be that one. There we go. So thank you all for joining. Lovely to have so many people on the call. Good afternoon to those in Europe and Asia, and good morning to those on the other side of the pond. We're going to start this by just chatting through what Future Fit Foundation has created, the Future Fit Business Benchmark, What is that tool? And then we're going to hear from Cora Olsen at Novo Nordisk about how they've actually used that tool. And hopefully as we go through these slides, we'll start to answer some of the questions that you've sent in, some fabulous questions, some quite difficult ones in there. I hope we'll pick some of them up as we go. But we want to gallop through what Future Fit is, as I'll probably leave you with far more questions than answers here. But bear with me as we run through this, and then Cora will pick up how, as a company, they've actually used the framework. As the screen says, a future fit society is one that protects the possibility that humans and other life can flourish on Earth forever by being environmentally restorative, socially just, and economically inclusive. Hopefully, if you've dialed into this call, none of you are going to sort of disagree with that as a statement. But what is Future Fit? In a nutshell, it's about shifting the flow of information around the system. Today, we would argue that there is a lot of information, a lot of data that flows around, but honestly, how useful is it? Is it all taking us in the right direction? Future Fit is about creating this, let's just use the term ESG type information based on what actually matters to the planet and society. How much of the data and things that we look at actually aligns with the thresholds that we need from a planetary perspective and from a societal perspective. We've already seen in the latest WMO report that came out just in the last sort of 24 hours, how much things are going beyond planetary limits. Again, probably all of you are at least vaguely aware of all of that. So how do we actually send information around the system that enables us to be understanding what our actions are doing relative to what actually matters? How do we then use that information to show companies what they actually need to do? What does it mean to be taking actions that are aligned with those thresholds, not just bashing them over the head, and equally not allowing them to just greenwash about the good stuff they're doing whilst not talking about all of the negative impacts that are being created, but give them actionable insight that enables them to create and drive better decisions, and then to pass all of that information on to the investors who want to understand where companies are going. How do they compare one with another? How do they look forward about the trajectory that companies are on? Which ones are actually taking us towards a flourishing future, and which ones are taking us away from that? And how can they then invest in the ones that are moving in the right direction? And how can they encourage the right action in those that are not, or indeed from taking their capital away from them if that's the route they want to go down? So that, in a nutshell, is what Future Fit is all about. So it's about saying, looking backwards tells us something, but it's really not good enough in terms of, are we moving towards the future that we need? And likewise, looking sideways against our peers tells us something, but it only drives a race to be the least bad against everybody else. I only killed 5 people this year, but you killed 6, therefore I'm better. Well, yes, okay, but is that really where we want to be going? Is that the right sort of measurement? If one is going on a journey and you're driving along, you occasionally glance in the side mirrors, you occasionally glance in the rearview mirror because that tells you something interesting. But actually, you should be looking at the front of the car. Where are you actually going to? What is the trajectory of the journey that you are on? And again, even setting short-term goals in that context is only helpful if they contribute to the right long-term aims. But if you don't know where you're going ultimately, how do you know that short-term target is necessarily in the right direction? So when we talk about the right kind of business benchmark, we mean about benchmarking against where we need to be in the future. And by that, we've defined this thing which we call the extra financial break-even point, the line in the sand, the planetary boundaries and the societal requirements beyond which every action is positive, is reinforcing, is environmentally restorative, socially just and financially inclusive, as we defined it earlier. That no action is on the wrong side of those lines. But unless we can actually clearly define that line in the sand, which we've done with the benchmark, then how do we know we're moving in the right direction? How do we know all of our actions are contributing to taking us there, or if there are trade-offs, what they look like? So using system science, we've defined that line in the sand and we've turned it into an actionable tool for companies to use. In front of you now, you can see the 7 overarching pieces of what a future fit society looks like. And underpinning that is an 8th around social norms, governance, and economic growth, all driving the pursuit of no waste, renewable energy, no pollution, of physical presence, protecting the health of ecosystems, communities, etc. We'll circulate these slides afterwards, so don't worry if you don't have time to scribble all of that down or read all of that right now. But what we did over the first 4 or 5 years of our existence, working with global experts through open consultations with many, many people who've helped us create the benchmark, is translate all of that into a meaningful set of actions. And if we think about any business can have a direct impact, an indirect impact through everything it does and the products and services it offers, and those things may have positive or negative impact. If we start in the bottom left-hand corner, if we think about this concept of the break-even point, the line in the sand that every company must reach, then every business must eliminate its own negative impact. It must avoid all actions that undermine societal well-being or degrade the environment. And through this consultation period and through multiple releases of the benchmark, we now have this set of 23 break-even goals that collectively define that line in the sand. And each of these is written in a way that at first glance, it's very easy to understand. You don't need a PhD in anything to understand the concept like energy is from renewable sources, or employee health is safeguarded, employees are paid at least a living wage. The concept is very, very easy. And as you can see, we've grouped all of these against those 8 overarching categories that we just took a very quick look at. Behind each of these goals, we've created very, very detailed guidance on what does it actually mean to achieve that goal and how do you measure your progress on a 0 to 100% scale. And the idea of that is it means there is no room for not being very concise and clear as where you are on that journey. So we've tried to make it as quantitative as possible, take away that qualitative risk. That means that we can make these progress indicators directly comparable between companies, particularly if they also report the direction of travel, i.e. where is their long-term goal, and the footprint of where they are today. So if you know what the progress is towards that line in the sand, what's the gap, what's the absolute footprint, and what have they committed to across each of these goals, you know where a company is today and where it is going versus this idea of environmental and social break-even. So we provide, as I say, very detailed guidance behind that, and we lean in on the best in class, where it's appropriate, guidance provided by others. So to answer some of the questions, things like CDP have produced the best guidance out there on how do you measure scope 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth. So when we mention goals around greenhouse gases and stuff like that, we point to the CDP guidance to say this is where you can actually go and how you measure it, but you are doing that measurement in terms of reducing your emissions ultimately down to 0. Or on living wage, we point to the Global Living Wage Coalition and their guidance on how do you calculate the living wage, etc., etc. So we're trying to pull together all those other pieces where some brilliant thinking has been done. We didn't need to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to pull it together in the sense of aiming for this one clear destination point. So that's doing no harm. What about the positive side of the coin? Because we all know that companies like to talk rightly about the good stuff that they're doing. And there are 3 other areas here in our little 2x2. So we define a positive pursuit, positive impact, as being any action that helps others to reduce their negative impact. So remember, the break-even was reducing your impact. How can you help others reduce their impact? How can you go beyond break-even yourself and achieve a clear positive impact? And then in the top right-hand corner, how can you amplify the positive impact of others? And what we've done there is created, again, across these 8 categories, now a set of 24, slightly annoyingly, 23 break-even goals, 24 positive pursuits. These are not actions, these are categories within which actions and products can sit that enable organizations to talk consistently about the positive things they are genuinely doing to reinforce these system conditions. So if you can put any of your actions meaningfully into these categories, then that for us is a positive pursuit. There may well be other nice or good things that you can do. Fine, we're not saying don't do those, but if they don't fall into these categories, then they're not reinforcing the system boundaries, they're not a positive pursuit. Again, we provide detailed guidance on what we mean within each of these categories, which then draws us together to create this complete picture. And what we ultimately want to be able to show is companies decoupling their success from negative impact, which is arguably where much of today's socioeconomic model takes you, and do that to decrease their vulnerability against the many, many changes that are hitting them today, but also increase their opportunity to recouple success to positive impact. Ultimately, we want businesses to flourish financially because they are achieving these positive pursuits and not having any negative impact through what they're doing. That is what the benchmark is doing, is creating a framework, a roadmap to help companies paint that journey. Very briefly, the approach then is one of self-assessment following the guidance that we provide. And then the benchmark has been designed to allow assurance through ISAE 3000, the international standard for non-financial data, so that as companies publish their results, they can have them independently assured, and thus anybody looking at the data can then have a reasonable degree of reliance upon that data. So to some of the questions that were about greenwashing, well, if they've followed the guidelines that we've put forward, then it's very clear there's no room for greenwashing in that. And if you've had that data independently assured, then again, it should be correct. Think of it in exactly the same way as going through your financials and getting it audited or assured according to IFRS. It's exactly the same, just mirrored for non-financial data, or extra financial data as we like to call it, and be able to publish that. So we're trying with this, the best of our ability, to take away that greenwashing element. Some others have asked the question about just how do we fit in with the market? Well, hopefully I've already sort of begun to outline that, but to be clear, we try to be a combination between a management tool built on social requirements that enable companies to report about the direction of travel. And ultimately, we link into and connect with all of these other pieces. We're not trying to shove them out of the market, but we recognize that some of these different tools are built from one perspective. We've tried to cover everything here and enable us to move in the right direction. So ultimately, I think there was a great question asked about, would we align with GRI or IR or SASB? Actually, we don't try specifically to just choose one and say that's the one we think wants to be the winner. What we want is companies to talk about their journey to being future fit. Ultimately, if they want to use IR type approach or a GRI approach, that's great. If investors want to use the financial materiality aspects of SASB, and we're producing some stuff that shows how we align with that, fantastic. But that is the market to choose, not for us to make that decision. In front of you, some of the companies who are using the framework are part of our development council and have been helping us to develop this over the years. We're going to hear from Novo Nordisk in a minute, but I just want to talk very briefly about two other examples. Firstly, the world's first Future Fit integrated report has just come out from a New Zealand-based organization called THL. For those of you who don't know them, it's Tourism Holdings Limited, is what THL stands for. And they rent RVs. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of that beautiful picture from New Zealand, you'll see one there, their little vans. I encourage you to go and take a look at their report. It's an absolutely fantastic commitment to becoming a future fit organization, driven by the fact that they see the world as a beautiful place that they want people to go and explore. So how do we, A, keep it beautiful, and how do they run their business in a way that enables them not to be destroying the very thing that they're trying to encourage people to go and see? And maybe that line across the bottom, Gayle, is the line I should have said is my answer to the UN. We can no longer simply walk the talk. All businesses need to dramatically increase the pace of change. That's from that report, and that is such a true statement. And Cora is going to follow up in a second with showing how they're doing exactly this. On the investor side, because again, there are a lot of questions around that, one of the other development council members is Hermes Investment Management. We've been working with them on both the engagement side of their business, because the benchmark gives these clear lines in the sand that enable an investor to go and talk to a company about what targets are you setting? Are you setting the right goals, and how are you moving in that direction? So they found it incredibly useful on that side. And then also on the investment management side, they're now starting to use this framework to analyze each of the companies in the benchmark, in their portfolio through the benchmark, and to understand what the overall picture looks like. Our end goal for investors is that one day, when every company is reporting its future fit data, you'll simply be able to aggregate that across a portfolio, and you would instantly be able to see the fitness of any investment portfolio. Imagine if you could look at any portfolio, your own pension savings, for example, and see how future fit that is, and then begin to challenge your pension manager and say, this isn't good enough. I want to see it moving more in this direction. How powerful does that finally become? It's something that people have been trying to achieve for a long time, and we believe that through the benchmark, finally we can do that. So we're now building a global community that's looking to connect all of these different pieces together. So I encourage you to take a look at our website, join the Changemaker community that's just launched, take a look at some of the tools and pieces that are there. All of the stuff that all our IP is free and downloadable right now. This is a critical part of our DNA. We are a charity as an organization. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I've used up more than enough time, so I am going to say thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to hand back control of the slides and hand over to Cora to talk about how they've used it in anger.
Thank you, Martin.
Or joy.
Most of the latter. Yes, thank you so much, Martin. It's always a pleasure listening to you. And now I will present to you basically what we have done and why we have chosen to work with the Future Fit Business Benchmark. My name is Cora Olsen, and I am the global lead on our integrated annual report. I am responsible for all the disclosures, the metrics that we have around ESG in the annual report. Just for your context, so you know why I'm so interested in disclosures and metrics. Can I have the next slide, please? Just for those of you that don't know Novo Nordisk, we are a Danish, the headquarters is in Denmark. We're a Danish pharmaceutical company, primarily producing diabetes care products. We are a global company, but again, as I said, headquarters in Denmark. Next slide, please. So we have a defined ambition at Novo Nordisk to become a sustainable business, one that of course creates value for our key stakeholders, and doing it in a way which is of course responsible, and in also taking into account what's around us, and make sure that we are agile and can anticipate what goes on in the world around us. But how do we then translate specifically the middle piece, the responsible piece, into something that we can actually measure? When do we know that we are there? And for us, that's the piece about actually becoming sustainable. And we've been struggling with the current way of measuring. Thank you. Because the traditional ways of measuring and tracking progress are simply inadequate in terms of driving sustainable performance. I mean, it doesn't take much evidence to make that statement clear. It's just a matter of looking at the news, looking at what's going on in the world. We are on a bad track in terms of actually safeguarding the future. So it's clear something needs to be done. Benchmarking is not possible with the current disclosures. You can't meaningfully, even within sector. I can give, so an example would be CO2 emissions. We of course emit CO2, but so does our peers. So, and even though just within sector, we can't meaningfully compare our CO2 emission to that of Novartis or that of Eli Lilly or that of Sanofi. It's a number, but it doesn't really say anything, because our types of production are vastly different. Then lots of raters and rankers, investors, they try to normalize numbers by dividing it out by revenue, number of people, square meters of office space. I've seen many creative ways of normalizing. but it still doesn't say anything about what good performance looks like. Traditional metrics, as you will see in many of the traditional standards and frameworks such as GRI, tend to drive just less bad performance because it's all about just reducing a performance, right? So every year it's about reducing CO2 emission, reducing water consumption, reducing OHS accidents rates, etc., which is not a bad thing, but it's not sustainable. And the challenge has been for us corporates is that we have had no idea of where we needed to go. We've been struggling with understanding what does good look like? When are we actually there? When are we sustainable? And that has been something that I've been looking for a long time, and I've personally been very frustrated by this type of old school disclosure that doesn't actually change things fundamentally. So I was very, very pleased when I picked up on the work being done by the Future Fit Foundation. And we have been very committed to their work ever since that time, because it is about time that companies step up and become truly accountable, both on negative performance. Of course, as Martin said, we should also get credit for the good stuff that we do, but there has definitely been a tendency to downplay the negative side of business as a role in society. And the Future Fit business, can you just go back? Thank you. And the Future Fit business benchmark is, and I really want to emphasize, it truly is groundbreaking and transformative in its way of measuring performance, because what it has given us is the real goal where we all need to be. And that's hugely exciting because it takes away a lot of not, I would say, the clutter of performance measurements, because now it's actually clear and there's only 23 disclosures. When you look at GRI or many of the other frameworks, there are several hundreds depending on how you apply your materiality filter. Here, it's 23 and it's across all sectors, which makes it extremely meaningful. And because it's percentage based, it's based on ratios, then you can actually compare meaningfully, because it's all about progressing towards becoming 100%, which is when you are truly sustainable. So it allows for real benchmarking across sectors, within sectors, and it's really, really fascinating. And what it also does is that it provides a clear and meaningful business link to the SDGs, because I think many corporates, and I'm not trying to make excuses here, coming back to my initial really frustrated remark, is it can be really difficult for companies to understand how do we translate the language of the SDGs into something that we can work with on a daily basis, because the SDGs were not written for corporates. Here again, the Future Fit Business Benchmark is hugely helpful, and I will show you an example in a few moments in my slides. Can I have my next one, please? So what did it do for us? Now we actually know how sustainable we are. We've completed the calculations for 2017 and 18. We just wrapped up assurance on 18, and it's been extremely insightful. It has definitely given us an improved understanding of our negative impacts and how that, I mean, in my book, a negative impact equals a business risk. So it has given us a much broader view of understanding how the negative impacts can become a risk to the business. We've identified blind spots. There were areas of business where we hadn't been very focused on, where we thought we were doing great, but when we started doing this very thorough work through of the Future Fit, then we actually found out that we did have some blind spot in terms of understanding the business properly. It gave us a clear understanding of what it actually takes to become sustainable, and this will inform strategy and decision making going forward. It's being written in to the corporate strategy, where this whole way of taking a systems view is being written in. What is absolutely amazing about this benchmark as well is this forward-looking materiality assessment that you can say it actually becomes, right? Because in order to become sustainable, those are the 23 areas of focus that you at least need to be focused on, right? And because you ultimately have to end up at 100%, and we now know where we are in terms of being 100, we can actually start planning, right, going forward in terms of how do we want to move the needle, and where can't we move the needle right now? Where do we actually need to get, where is it not just upon us to make change? Where do we actually need the system to change, the infrastructure to change? Where do we need to come together as a sector, etc.? At last but not least, it's also going to help us structure our communication because we are going to build it into a frame around future fit, especially also targeting the investor community with raters and rankers. Because we are choosing to use the future fit as this frame, we are actually going to stop, and you may quote me on this, or we are not going to stop, we have stopped, full stop, responding to any questionnaires we get in from all of these raters and rankers. No more DJSI, MSCI, Sustainalytics, ISS. I can go on. I've been filling them out for years, but that has stopped now because an investor relations department said, we're going to do this instead, and this is how we're going to frame the dialogue. My next slide, please. So coming back to what I just mentioned about the action guides and the SDGs. So for each of the 23 metrics or goals, there's a clear action guide describing the criteria that has to be met in order to be future fit and to reach the 100%. So there's clear criteria carved out in each action guide describing everything that you need to fulfill in order to make the calculation. It's extremely helpful, and it's really, really strong because it also actually puts a weight on qualitative information. It's actually intelligent in the way that it gives you credit for having solid processes and governance in place. So it's not just about a consumption or an emission. It's actually also something about the rigorous and business integration. So that's very, very exciting. And as you can see, so I just picked one, employees are paid at least a living wage. And on the cover of each of these action guides, you can see how that particular metric or the goal taps into the SDGs. And I think that's very, very strong and helps companies understand, okay, so by paying employees at least a living wage, then I tap into these SDGs, and I can actually proactively tap into these areas, because it can be extremely difficult, again, like I said, to translate the SDGs into action. So for this, or for us at least, this has been hugely helpful. Can I get the next slide, please? So how future fit are we? So because we've just wrapped up the 18 data, I'm going to show you some of the 17 data. Can I have the next one, please? So for 5 KFIs, we are 25% or below. Between 0 and 25%, I guess, is the better way of saying that. For 8 KFIs, we are mediocre, and for 10 KFIs, we are 99% to 100. So a nice spread. Of course, it's nice to see that there are 10 KFIs that we are where we actually are future fit. But of course, what management reacts to is, of course, the 5. They're less interested in the 10 where we're actually doing pretty well. They are, of course, more interested. So what does that mean? And since we have been working with sustainability for so many years, how could that be? But again, it's because the future fit takes this systems view. It has showed us areas where we simply are not good enough, are not consistent enough globally, or simply cannot become future fit at this point in time. And if we move to the next slide, I can show you one of the ones where we are 0. So if you look at the one, products can be repurposed, we come out at 0%. We are 0% future fit here. And that's because our products, the diabetes care, comes in a pen. And so it's a plastic pen. It's in a glass vial and a plastic pen. And right now there is no take back system in place for us to get our pens back. So they end up in landfills where there's no infrastructure to actually make sure that things are sorted right. And that's something we have to look into, but it's not something that we can fix tomorrow. It's not something that we can fix next year. One thing is that we can be innovative and try to create a pen that that's biodegradable, that you can pick apart. But we need a system that also brings the pen back to us, right? And that requires a whole system to actually change. We need to come together as a sector and work with governments to make sure that infrastructure is actually being built so people can make sure that we can get the products back. So that's going to take some time. That's not something that we can fix here and now, right? Employee health is safeguarded. We are at 60% because there's 2 of the criteria that we are currently not meeting on a global scale. Water use is environmentally responsible and socially equitable. 7% of our water consumption is in China, where we have a strategic site. And this site is actually located in a water scarce area. So seeing the data in this way was actually a huge eye opener, because how we've been doing water management previously, it has been about optimizing what we use in terms of production, making sure that we on a global scale just keep reducing and refining. But having this view makes us zoom in on China and figure out how can we actually work with partners to make sure that we never compromise our own availability of water, and certainly do not get to a point where we actually take away water from the local community. So it's a different lens of viewing the business through, which is hugely interesting for us in terms of understanding business risks. And the last one, business is conducted ethically, is one where I'm really, really happy where we got 100%, because this is a key material issue for a pharmaceutical company. It doesn't say that we don't have any misconduct or calls to the whistleblower hotlines, but according to the Future Fit criteria, we have very, very solid processes and governance in place. Can I have my next slide, please? The Circular for Zero is our new environmental strategy, which I will let you look at online. This was just to give you an idea of one spin-off in this way of thinking Future Fit. So there's this whole new environmental strategy where we want to have zero negative impact by 2030. But everything's online if you are interested in diving further. Next one, please. In the interest of time, I think I will skip that one. Basically, the feedback we got has been very, very positive, especially from our people in our investor relations department, because now they can actually engage more meaningfully. But also from our employees, because we engaged with line of business, because we couldn't do this ourselves. So we had to engage with each goal owner, you could say. And because it was so specific in the terms of criteria, it was an easy sell, because we basically pitched this is something that can help Novo Nordisk become sustainable. Here's the actions and the criteria that you need to work with in order to make sure that we actually do become future fit going forward. So it's been very, very positive all around. Next one, please. I will skip that too. I will wrap up here. I mean, this was just basically the plan for 2019, where we expect to launch in 2 months' time all of our data as part of our Capital Markets Day. So stay tuned. I hope you will check back in on November 20th. But I think I will stop here. There's no more content as such. Yeah, coming back to the initial conversation with the SDGs.
No, thank you so much. Cora and Martin, that was a fabulous presentation. We have a lot of questions, as you can imagine. And again, I think that it's important to remember that the Future Fit methodology is publicly available. Martin will be actually teaching this framework at our social finance program, so that our students will begin to understand how this can be incorporated into their own work, and to also challenge Martin as he's expanding and rethinking and refining Future Fit benchmarking, what they can add to that conversation. There's a really provocative question that our colleagues have asked, which is, are investors leaders or laggards when it comes to meaningful disclosure on issues of the Future Fit benchmark? Yeah, and talk a little bit about this. Sustainability space has been quite full for a long time. What's your reaction to that? Are investors today leaders or laggards?
Laggards. Martin?
Laggards. No question.
Okay, so give us the answer. Give us the response to why.
Cora, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I think I mean, they are laggards. I would say they are at least 10, 15 years behind, and I can just see it by what's being put out, also from stock exchanges, etc. What we're being asked to provide. I think one of the reasons why they are also laggards is because the companies are afraid to actually challenge what we're being asked. So we basically just help feed the beast, if you will, because we don't challenge, we don't dare to challenge what they're asking. We just basically just feed them what they want, right? But so it's time we need to take back control and actually say you're asking the wrong questions. Martin.
Yeah, I think my analogy with that is, I think if you look back on companies over the last, well, say, go back 10, 15 years, I think what you've seen is an evolution where in the past, the doing good was all about CSR, right? It was giving some money away, it was days off your stuff, whatever it might be, which isn't bad stuff, but it had nothing to do with the core business.
No.
And what we're seeing now is a general evolution of that sort of add-on becoming embedded in the business, and now the cutting edge conversations, the conversations that Novo Nordisk and THL and others are having, is how do we embed this in everyday business? What does it mean to do business the right way? Either because we believe that's the right thing to do, or because we see massive risks coming and we want to shift our business to address those risks. But the whole idea of embedding sustainability into the core of our day-to-day activity, so it doesn't become sustainability, just becomes the way we do business, is where the conversation is going. And I think with investors, what we're seeing today is kind of that old CSR model replicated, where it's an add-on, right? We've bought an impact investment and we've stuffed that in another fund, or we're trying to identify the 3 or 4 good SDGs that companies are. We've invested in a water fund, a water company, therefore we could stick the water SDG on our fund. For many, I know obviously we're generalizing here, for many it still feels like we're at that add-on stage rather than that true integration. And what gets me excited and hopeful, not that apparently Greta wants my hope, but what gets me excited is the idea that we are beginning to see a small but growing number of asset managers and investors saying, actually, what does it mean to truly integrate impact into our portfolio? How do we understand the effect that we are having on the world, good or bad, and how do we start to change that? Which obviously FutureFit hopes to help inform. But that's why, to me, it's laggard is simply because you're seeing that transition, but they're at a much further back space. Could they catch up and overtake? Possibly. Just to be controversial.
It's controversial. Well, and I think that idea of, so there's been a number of questions on where does the benchmarking fit with the impact management project? That's the standard and the buzz these days. So your reaction to that? Where does it fit?
Absolutely. We've been one of the many participants in that program. What we've done, the latest release of our positive pursuits, which really sort of aligns with all of the wording, the lexicon they've put out. We have done everything that we can to align our use of language with theirs. So the one thing, IMP have done an absolutely superb job of bringing together a large part of the market and saying, right, let's at least unify terms and terminology and the lexicon that we're going to use. So when we say breadth or we say depth or whatever it is, we know what we mean. So we've absolutely aligned our language with them, because why not? Let's help be consistent and all talk in the same way. What they haven't yet produced is a metric set. I believe that they're sort of trying to, the grouping more broadly is looking at that and working in that direction. So we're watching for that whilst we're doing the same with the positive pursuits. And ultimately, there's a future conversation to be had there. If we produce something, we'll offer it to that group. If they come up with something that the sector says works for doing this, then we'll absolutely embrace and use that. So it's a great example, Gayle, of where we're trying to not elbow everybody else out of the way, but rather just make sure that all of these different pieces link together, and then different participants in the market can use each piece how they want to, but flow effortlessly from one to the other, rather than it being a completely separate framework that you've got to completely start again with.
Well, one of the questions that another question has been asked is, as you know, shifting corporate culture and really including integrating future fit benchmarking into the DNA of an organization is hard. There are companies that say, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. And so, Cora, how did you get the C-suite to adopt the benchmarking process, and how long did it take for it to stick?
I mean, you could say so. We are still in a process of doing that, if you will. I mean, it's been, I think what we did, which has worked for us, was that we more or less started from the bottom up by just getting line of business on board. We didn't come in and say, here's a new reporting requirement. This is something that we need to disclose. We actually went the other way and said, this is something that can help you create value. And then that trickled upwards. And at the same time, several things happened at the same time. We also got a new CEO in, who really is into this whole sustainable business agenda. And it wasn't that hard of a sell. I mean, so it's not like we know how we're gonna get there. And of course, the ones where we are zero and the ones where we are mediocre, the ones that are difficult, it's something that challenges people, because there's this notion that we've been doing this for so many years. How come we are bad then? So I mean, we're not completely there in terms of everyone just saying this is amazing, but people are willing to engage and have that conversation. But it does take time. It does take time, and it's the poor scores that throw people off, right?
Martin, you were going to say something, and then we're going to turn it over to Annabelle to talk about the programs. But yes.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Well, and I think that one piece of how do you move quickly, and this is something to leave the audience with. The time is short.
Yes.
We need to move quickly. We need to change the way we think about benchmarking, economic models, and I think that how we challenge and change quickly is going to be the issue facing us right now in the context of climate and sustainability. So I want to thank the two of you for participating in this. And again, the slides will be available. And thank you for your questions. Annabelle, do you want to talk about the program and share how people can get involved?
Yeah, thank you, Gayle. So thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day or evening or morning to attend the webinar today. It's I think what was really great is having so many people email with their questions last week and being so engaged. We have got our next program in 6 weeks' time, Social Finance, which Martin will be teaching on. So we're very excited to welcome him to that. We have just opened our applications for the 2020 program. So if you'd like to find out more about social finance in particular and how to apply, please get in touch with me directly. Our impact investing program is taking place in March. To those of you who work for a non-profit organisation, we have got scholarships available. The deadline to apply for these scholarships is actually Monday the 30th, so a week's time. So again, please get in touch with me if you'd like to know more about those. And our impact measurement program is running next July. So any questions, please do get in touch with me about those. Finally, if we have launched a social impact newsletter, so every month we'll be sending out information on what's happening within our community, so alumni stories, events that are taking place. If you'd like to be part of that mailing list, please get in touch and we'll make sure that we do that for you. Within that newsletter, we will include a recording of the webinar, today's webinar, as well as the link to the YouTube page, which has all of our historic webinars all together. Thank you once again to everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.